Hey, welcome to BJJ Mental Models, episode 44. I'm Steve Kwan.
I'm Matt Kwan.
BJJ Mental Models is your guide to a conceptual and intelligent jiu-jitsu approach, and we have new sound equipment. We've actually got a real podcasting setup now. We've got more than just like a tiny ghetto USB mic. It took a bit of learning on my part to figure out how this stuff works, but I'm hoping the sound quality will be even better than it was in the past.
Yeah, luckily we don't have to huddle around a microphone anymore, so we're actually sitting more than half a foot away from each other.
Yeah, it's actually kind of nice. We don't have to cuddle. I mean, when we were with Oliver Taza, that was maybe when we realized like 3 people cuddled in pretty close proximity is maybe a little bit too close for comfort when we're recording podcasts. If we're going to be getting more guests on in the future, then this is awesome because it means that now we have the right equipment. We can kind of set up in a more comfortable spot and one step, I guess, towards building like a real podcasting studio.
Yeah. Well, how's it going, Steve?
It's going pretty good. We're recording on Saturday for those who are, well, I guess no one has any idea when we record this. We normally try to
live when we play our shows.
Yeah. We normally try to record like a week or two in advance. So we're trying to get some episodes out of the gate. Now, Matt had a great idea for an episode. He's probably going to take most of the wheel on this one, but the topic that we want to talk about is rule sets. Now, my understanding, Matt, is we're not talking exclusively about particular rule sets and how they work, but also at a higher level, how these rule sets can actually change the nature of the art itself. Is that correct?
Yeah. So anyone who follows competitive jiu-jitsu knows that there's a variety of different rule sets in jiu-jitsu and grappling in general, and really those rule sets are what defines how the sport is played. For instance, if you want to take something like judo and compare it to Brazilian jiu-jitsu, they're really 2 heads of the same, dragon, but the only part is that
Hydra.
Yeah. You know what I mean? They're two heads of the same Hydra, which I believe is it an 8-headed dragon?
Yeah, I mean, there's 6 other heads. We haven't figured out what those are yet.
Yeah, probably Gracie self-defense.
That might have been like my favorite episode that we've ever done, the Gracie self-defense episode.
You take judo and you take BJJ, and what really what differentiates them is the rule sets, right? In one you're trying to keep it on the feet and land big throws, and if it goes to the ground, occasionally you can work ground technique or newaza. And in Brazilian jiu-jitsu, it almost, well, I'd say, definitely over 50% of the time you skip right past the standing part and someone pulls guard right away and you're into the guard passing. So even though they both have a lot of the same techniques, the reasons that sometimes the techniques will be modified from one art to another or the strategies is because of the rule set. So for instance, in judo, if it hits the ground, a lot of the time someone will just go belly down and basically be like a log shape and just wait for the referee to stop the match, completely exposing their back and basically allowing the person to start an attack if they want. But oddly enough, in Olympic judo, you see a lot of people just ignore this portion of the match and they just would rather stand up and try and land big throws, where in jiu-jitsu, if you give that to someone, that's basically a death wish.
Yeah, it's funny how I think it was Clay Guida I heard doing an interview one time, and he comes from a wrestling background, and he was talking about the first time he actually fought in an MMA fight, and he just immediately gave up his back because that's totally fine to do if you're wrestling. When you get put to the ground, you think, oh, I'll just turtle up, and of course he got like choked out. So it is interesting how rule sets can really modify and adjust the art itself. Usually in the short term, there's some reason why a rule is put into place, but over the long term, all of these rules can kind of have like a ripple effect and can really change the course of development of that art. The example I'm personally probably most familiar with is judo, which over the years has evolved quite a bit, mostly to differentiate it from wrestling, because as an Olympic sport, you have to constantly justify your value. And if someone looks, some committee person takes a look at your art and says, oh, this is just the same as wrestling, then you can risk getting cut. So, they've got to make it unique. And as a result, they start doing things like taking out leg takedowns And, yeah, maybe that does make the art itself more unique and give it its own unique flavor, but it also waters down the art by removing some of the actual most useful techniques that you have at your disposal. Now, Jiu-Jitsu, I don't know if we've seen an impact to the same degree that we have with Judo, but we've talked in the past about how some of these rule changes really risk watering down the art by taking away things that would be very viable in a real fight. And probably the most immediately understandable example would be leg reaping or various types of leg locks.
Or even takedowns.
Yeah,
it's not really like encouraged in IBJJF rule set. So I think a lot of stand-up fighters would say that, you're watering down jiu-jitsu because you're not really rewarding takedowns very much. So as a result, people just pull guard. And then you could make a very valid argument that that is not good for street self-defense.
Well, yeah, that's actually a really good point, which is that when you're talking about takedowns, I mean, these are not banned in jiu-jitsu. It's not like leg reaping, but...
Yeah, it's just a waste of time.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, right? Like it is... Exactly that. It's a waste of time. You're burning tons and tons of energy for 2 points when there's actually more efficient and effective ways under the jiu-jitsu rule set to get those 2 points. So the problem is that the rules in this situation have possibly led to the, I don't want to say the watering down of, but there's a very effective weapon that is supposed to be in the grappler's arsenal, and it's almost completely overlooked in jiu-jitsu. And I can say this from experience, mostly my own. There are a lot of people, even at the black belt level, who have just a joke of a takedown game because you don't need it. I mean, I'm one of them, right? Like I rarely do takedowns. My entire strategy is to get the guard that I want and go for sweeps or submissions. And there's this massive hole in my knowledge simply because the rules that we play under don't encourage you to go there. Yeah. And it's also very easy, given the rules that we have, for your opponent to refuse to allow you to go there, even if you want to.
Yeah. And as a result, sometimes, as I saw today, I was at a tournament and I was explaining to one of my junior students about, we're talking strategies, and he's like, yeah, I really want to stand. And I'm like, I don't know, man, maybe you should pull guard. And he's like, no, I want to stand. I'm like, all right, this is your experience, so go in there and stand with the guy. So he goes and stands, and the other guy immediately pulls him to close guard, and he actually ends up getting swept. Luckily, he was able to, scramble back into a close guard and re-sweep the guy and win the match. But it was just like, it just goes to show that because of how the IBJJF rule set has modified the sport, sometimes it can just be a race to the bottom. The person who gets to the bottom first now has the scoring position. And this is how a lot of people play the game under the IBJJF rule set. And I'm sure most of you who are listening know, but the IBJJF rule set is basically, it's almost the unified rules of at least gi jiu-jitsu, whereas ADCC would probably be the no-gi equivalent in terms of, the most prestigious rule set or the most popular rule set. So 2 very different arts, and again, showing how, it's not necessarily about removing the gi that changes the art itself, but for instance, in IBJJF, there's no penalty for pulling guard as long as you make grips throughout the entire match. It almost favors the guard puller. Whereas something like ADCC, the rule sets are, the first 5 minutes, there's no points. Halfway through the match, they turn on points. And then from there, if you pull guard, it's -1. Or
Really?
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah. So if you pull guard, you get -1 point, I guess. And then in overtime, the same thing. So if you want to go far in the ADCCs, you really have to be a decent wrestler, and you have to be willing to wrestle. Whereas in IBJJF, you could be legitimately a world champion and not wrestle at all.
Interesting. I mean, this is actually super interesting for me because, as we've talked about many times, I mean, I don't compete. I don't even really follow competition. So when it comes to the IBJJF, just through years of training in the gi, I've had the rules drilled into my head pretty hard, but I don't really watch or pay attention to a lot of no-gi stuff. So I wasn't even aware until we started talking to Oliver Taza about exactly how different the rules are in ADCC.
Oh, super different.
So maybe it would be good to go over that, because I am also often surprised a lot of the time how even really senior people don't understand the rules. It's very, very common to get confused there. So, I mean, going through the major rule sets, like you said, Matt, probably the most well-known rule set is going to be the IBJJF rule set. I mean, generally speaking, and Matt, you tell me if I'm making an error here, you get 2 points for a takedown, you get 2 points for a sweep, you get 3 points for a pass, 4 points for mount, 4 points for back mount, 2 points for knee on belly.
Exactly.
And there's certain things that are illegal up until a certain level. There's also certain things that are just never legal. The majority of leg locks, with the exception of ankle locks, which are legal at white, but the majority, like toe holds and knee bars, those you don't unlock until you get to brown belt. And heel hooks are never legal in IBJJF. There's also, I believe, a whole bunch of moves that submissions that are illegal when you're like below 16, but I can never remember what those are. Is that the case, Matt? I believe that when you're in the kids divisions, there are some submissions that are banned.
Like you're not allowed to pull down on the back of the head during a triangle. You're not allowed to jump guard. You're not allowed to do single legs with your head on the outside, which, you know, are all I think good things. But the pulling down, and you're not allowed to, I think, I don't know what age you're allowed to do omoplata, like finish omoplata, because I don't know. It's weird how they make up these rules, but I guess they think that the kids don't have enough control to either control the force that they put down on someone's shoulder with their leg, or in terms of the triangle, they just, you know, they don't think that kids have strong enough necks, I guess, that they can tolerate like a triangle pulling the head down. But I really don't know where they get these rules from, because if you ever watch kids wrestle, they're slamming each other's heads into the mat, and, you know, it's just part of the sport, right?
Yeah,
So,
I kind of wonder if it's less that they don't think the kids can do it, and more just that, like, there's no important reason for them to do it. Like, if you're a 14-year-old, is it really worth having any kind of, like, actual risk in a tournament for 14-year-olds? I think that might be where it comes from, is just that, like, you don't really have serious high-level tournaments at that level. They're still kids. It's not worth taking those kinds of risks. I mean, that said, I've never thought of, like, triangle chokes as particularly dangerous, but I guess someone else feels otherwise. So
yeah, I mean, if you don't tap, yeah, it's
well, yeah,
dangerous.
that is the case with literally any move, right?
Yeah, exactly. And IBJJF is basically, like I said, like almost the unified gi rule set for jiu-jitsu, at least modified variations of it, but that is pretty much the status quo. You go to most gi tournaments, that's the rule set you're going to go to. And some tournaments will go outside the box and they'll allow certain things, like they'll allow leg locks at lower ranks, or they'll mix up the ranks. I've been to tournaments that, you know, have open belt levels and weight divisions, and, you know, allowing different submissions. Some tournaments like locally, CBJJF has the IBJJF rule set, but then recently what they've been doing for no-gi advanced divisions is adding heel hooks. And for me,
probably a good idea.
Yeah, and reaping as well. And for me, I think that's actually the best rule set, in my opinion. Coming from a jiu-jitsu background, if I was from a wrestling background, transitioning into jiu-jitsu, I'd probably favor the ADCC rule set. You know, if your strength is takedowns, then you're probably going to favor the rule set that is more advantageous to the wrestler. Whereas me, I'm quite happy to sit on my butt. So I enjoy the rule set where you can pull guard without penalty, and then you can reap and do heel hooks as well, because it really changes the game. You know, like next week I'm going to Tacoma to do the Revolution tournament, and I'm doing gi and no-gi, and the no-gi division, it follows the IBJJF set. So there's no reaping and there's no heel hooks. So it's like, it's different, because 99% of the time I do no-gi, I add heel hooks and reaps, and I'm used to those techniques, and now I'm not allowed to do it. So, you know, and it's very likely that I'll be going against guys that don't do heel hooks at all.
Yeah.
Even at the black belt level, you know, guys that don't do heel hooks usually, or aren't super knowledgeable in heel hooks, that are used to the IBJJF rule set without the gi and without reaping. And now that's what I'm going into. So I'm going to have to modify my strategy a little bit, I guess. Yeah,
you're going to have to learn clean jiu-jitsu. You're going to have to get rid of that garbage gutter jiu-jitsu that you guys do, you foot fetishists. So I guess the one other thing that we should mention before we move on past IBJJF, probably the area where people often get into the most trouble with IBJJF and understanding the rules is the reaping rule, right? And in IBJJF, leg reaping is illegal, and it's very hard to describe what that means using just words. In fact, even using images, it's very hard to kind of explain it. But and the rules are not even entirely enforced consistently. But basically, the idea is if you're taking your leg and like wrapping it around your opponent's leg from the outside going inward, it's considered a reap, and you can get disqualified for doing that. I'm trying to think of kind of like an easy example to explain this.
Single leg X, bring the leg across.
Yeah, if you were going to pull single leg X on someone, you know how you've got like the one like your knee is kind of like wedged in there, and then your outside foot, usually your heel, is like pushed up against their hip. If you just keep driving that foot across and it like forces your opponent's knee to buckle and they have to turn away, that's a reap, and that kind of thing can get you disqualified. And the logic is that you know, like knee attacks, particularly twisting attacks, are so dangerous that they must be outlawed. Now,
yet toe holds are allowed, knee bars are allowed.
This is the thing that I find especially baffling is, I mean, from my perspective, the toe hold is, I think, probably the most overall dangerous submission in jiu-jitsu. It's just, from what I've seen, when people get injured, it's often with toe holds. There's very little give in terms of like when it's safe and when it's not. You can throw that on there, and there's not a lot of like muscle in the body that allows you to prevent the toe hold from happening. So if someone grabs it and really cranks onto you, they don't really have a good barometer for exactly how much danger you're in, and you don't really have any like muscles that you can tense up to alleviate the pressure.
In fact, that could that could work against you if you tense up during a toe hold.
Yeah, I mean, it's
like kick into it.
Yeah, it's not good. And of course, toe holds also attack, you know, not just the ankle, but also the knee. So I've found it very weird that those are considered legal, but heel hooks are not. I mean, I don't think heel hooks against a trained opponent are especially dangerous. I mean, if you are at training with an experienced heel hooker and you yourself are experienced enough to know where the danger lies, honestly, they're pretty safe, at least from my experience. As long as you're not like trying to Superman your way out of a submission, it should be pretty safe.
As long as you learn proper heel hooks, it's safe. If you... The thing is like maybe, what was it, 5 to 8 years ago, before you started seeing like Gary Tonin get really famous and all, the Danaher Death Squad sort of exploded onto the scene with this leg lock system that was really sophisticated at the time, and obviously still is really sophisticated, and it was catching a lot of people off guard. You would see them go into tournaments and just go to ashigarami on everybody and basically submit everybody with these leg locks, because nobody really knew what they were trying to do and which way to go and what strategy they should impose, how to hide their heel, all this stuff. So you'd see these leg locks where, really hard to stop. So, I mean, nowadays, if you know anything about leg locks, it's actually really hard to catch guys, I find, when you're doing heel hooks on people that understand what you're trying to do to them. And yeah, it's interesting how the game has evolved that way, and still IBJJF, I feel, is falling behind, because all these world-class grapplers, you know, I think that they should be competing in IBJJF, as it is sort of known as the most prestigious event, but still they don't have things like heel hooks and reaps. So how could it be more prestigious than something like an ADCC, which allows, you know, most submissions? And oddly enough, ADCC, like, they actually don't allow all submissions. Like, they don't allow full Nelsons and things like that.
So what exactly, as someone who doesn't compete and doesn't really follow this, what exactly is the difference between like the ADCC rule set and before we even do that, just like maybe even just general no-gi grappling, what is the primary difference between, and I understand that general no-gi grappling is not like an official rule set, but in general, when you go into like a Naga tournament, what would be the differences in the rule set that you'd have to know about?
In terms of Naga, it's very minor differences from IBJJF. I think they actually made some changes, because I recently did a Naga, and I thought one of the rules is, you know, you don't need a guard to score if you sweep. So if you sweep from like bottom side control or bottom mount, a position where you don't have guard, you come up on top. I thought that reversal was worth points, but at the last Naga, they weren't scoring that. So it seemed like they were following the IBJJF model a little bit more. So it's pretty similar. They sometimes change the weight classes and the you know, the times of the matches and things like that, but for the most part, it was pretty similar. In the no-gi divisions, though, the expert, they do allow heel hooks and reaps.
Got it.
And even IBJJF doesn't do that, right?
So really the main difference is probably just the ability to reap and the ability to heel hook, right? Like everything else is kind of minor compared to those two.
Yeah, pretty much. Those are kind of the two major things. And I think they allow twisters, you know, like spine cranks and things like that. So it's pretty open with the rule set, and I like to support tournaments like that a little bit more.
Got it.
And you know, and you were asking about like no-gi rule sets. Like you said, there's no unified no-gi rule set, but pretty much it's usually either submission only, which is, it's either going to be like submission only and then ref's decision to a draw, or it's going to be submission only with an EBI rule set, right? And we can talk about that more in a sec. And then the other option would be like a point structure, which is going to be either an IBJJF system or an ADCC rule set, which is quite a bit different from IBJJF. So
Got it.
ADCC, there's, the first 5 minutes of the match are points, last 5 minutes of the match first 5 minutes are not points, last 5 minutes are points.
Is the point system the same as like IBJJF, or is it a completely different point system?
It's actually completely different. There's no advantages. So if you take someone down and then you have them for like 2 seconds and then they pop back up, you don't even get an advantage for that. That would be, it doesn't score unless you hold them down for 3 seconds. And the points come in halfway through the match. Also, I believe certain positions are worth different amounts of points. God, I'm gonna butcher this. I believe takedowns are still worth 2, and I think mount and back are worth 3. I could be wrong, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, don't take us to the bank on this one. I would say, in general, definitely look up and make sure you really understand the rules of any tournament that you go into. This is a very common mistake where they will lose, not necessarily because of skill, but because they fail to understand the intricacies of the local tournament rules.
Yeah, like that's all, that's such a big thing. You could be a really high level jiu-jitsu fighter, but if you don't understand the rules, you don't understand what's legal, what's not legal, and how to play the game and things like this. And, for example, with the ADCC rule set, if you want to play guard, you can pull guard in the first 5 minutes without penalty, without even making contact. But let's say you're on your feet and you're about to enter the halfway mark in your match. If you want to be on your butt, you have to pull before that halfway mark. Otherwise, you're going to get penalized after that. And that's just one thing. That's just, for example, one thing that could be, that could surprise someone who's not prepared for that rule set. So
what exactly is the logic here behind having no points in the first 5 minutes and then having points suddenly come on in the last 5 minutes? That just seems weird to me. Is there some justification for that, or is that just always the way it's been?
I mean, I think the justification would be that they want to cater to different grappling arts. So whether you have a jiu-jitsu background and you like to pull guard, they want to give you an opportunity to pull guard. But if you're a wrestler, they also want you to have an opportunity to be able to use your wrestling to get a win, right? So if it goes to overtime or whatever, it kind of denies the guy the ability to pull guard, right? So they want to give, I guess, multiple grappling styles an equal share, which is
interesting.
And you used to see more polarized styles back in the day for ADCC. You used to see like, a jiu-jitsu guy, a catch wrestler, a sambo guy, and it was kind of like MMA when it first started. And now everything is sort of blending together, and basically
much like MMA.
Yeah, and the most dominant grappling art seems to be Brazilian jiu-jitsu with wrestling and with, leg locks and things like that.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. And I kind of respect that, because it's hard to come up with a rule set that's going to work for everyone. And the problem is, any martial art that is actually undergoing a lot of stiff competition. Like if people are really actively training something and it becomes a very competitive art and there's a lot of very, very good talent there are going to be new strategies introduced all the time. And those strategies may or may not make sense under the existing rule system. So I think it's good that they're trying to come up with something that works for everyone. And I kind of get that. Like, in the first 5 minutes, do what you want, but in the last 5 minutes, stalling is not really going to be so much an option if suddenly points are on, whereas they weren't before. So that's kind of I think a good marriage between allowing like the slow, methodical grappling approach to kind of go up against a more speed-based approach.
Yeah.
Like, that's one of the things that drives me nuts about MMA is 5 minute rounds, like especially with a super, super emphasis on getting top position in MMA. It means that grappling is really kind of nerfed. Like, it's, against a high level guy, getting a lot done in 5 minutes can be pretty challenging, right? Like, it's really hard to get someone to the floor and finish them within 5 minutes, especially without the gi. So that's one of the things about MMA that always kind of drives me crazy, is it feels like grappling is kind of being punished. So I think it's cool that they've got kind of a rule set that tries to accommodate everybody.
Yeah, and you do have to look at it really strategically. So, if you, for example, let's say you're fighting under the ADCC rule set and it's the first 5 minutes of the match and you've taken your partner down or your opponent down and you're on top and you've passed, and then, so far there's no score, and then as the clock is ticking down, if you continue the sequence and maybe force taking the back before the points are on, you deny yourself points, right? So you really have to have a like I said, a mindfulness of what's going on and what time it is, and don't score too early because the clock is ticking and you want to wait for the right time to get your points. And this is all through grappling,
any sport, actually,
any sport, right? Using the rules to your advantage, playing the clock to your advantage.
Yeah, I mean, we all want to be like purists where just the best martial artist wins. But, a big part of being the best martial artist is not being the most deadly or even the most skilled, but it's about being the best at the entire martial art, which means applying and understanding the rules. And this is not a strategy that is unique to martial arts. I mean, any sport or really any competitive aspect of life is a situation where you want to make sure that you maximize the rules to your advantage. I mean, if you've ever had to be involved with anything relating to taxes or legal matters, you understand this, right? It's not enough to be right or wrong. You have to actually play to the rules. If you do your taxes properly, you can wind up with a lot more money in your pocket than if you didn't. I know people who just for the longest time didn't really care about their tax structure and they just kind of ignored it. And then at one point they realize I'm losing 30% of my income because my tax structure is not appropriate for what I'm trying to do. And we've talked in earlier episodes about how when the level of technique is in the same stratosphere between two people, any advantage that you have over the other person becomes a big deal. If I'm as a black belt, if I'm fighting a white belt, honestly, it doesn't matter how big or strong they are. I'm really not concerned, right? They could be 400 pounds of solid muscle and I'll probably figure out a way to do something. But if you're both at roughly the same experience level, then suddenly any advantage you have becomes way more important. Now, you may not be the biggest guy or the strongest guy or the fastest guy, but you might be the guy who best understands the rules. And that is an advantage. It's people often when they think of advantages, they think of physical gifts that they have over their opponent. But even a superior understanding of the rule set can be a massive advantage and can win you a lot of matches over people who probably would be otherwise better than you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for example, with ADCC, they don't give advantages for near takedowns or near sweeps. So if I'm playing on my butt and points,
and you are,
and I will be, and points are engaged, if I go for a sweep and I pretty much sweep you, and then before I get my score, you stand back up. It's pretty easy in the moment if you're not experienced to just stand up right then and there. But if you stand up, not only do you not score, but you forfeit the ability to pull guard again, right? So, this takes a lot of mindfulness during the match as well to know that if you don't score the sweep, just sit right back down, right? Or better yet, don't even come up to your feet because you could get awarded or you could get penalized 1 point, right? So it really is a game as well as a fight. And I will say that the ADCC rule set is definitely probably the most violent of the grappling arts aside from combat jiu-jitsu. But even I don't know, combat jiu-jitsu,
slapping really it's violent, but it's kind of silly.
I think it's kind of silly. I think they kind of, unfortunately, Eddie Bravo kind of spoiled his event and made it combat jiu-jitsu now, which I totally miss the old structure, and I think a lot of people miss the old rule set as well. Because for me, I found that EBI with combat jiu-jitsu basically just turns into jiu-jitsu from the closed guard. It turns into tighter jiu-jitsu, and some matches guys don't even throw strikes. But they know that there's the threat of it. You don't see it as much.
Well, I mean, now granted, I am 100% ignorant on this. I know nothing about striking and I know nothing about combat jiu-jitsu other than that you can slap people. But I would think that at the highest levels, that would not be as much of a discouragement as something like MMA, where you have, fist protectors and you can effectively punch the person as hard as you want. I would think that would be much more of a threat than a slap.
Yeah. And I think these MMA guys that are, good grapplers can easily transition into combat jiu-jitsu and be like, well, I'm not even getting punched.
Yeah.
What's the big deal? It's, this is going to be easy for me. This is going to be fun for me, right? And then you got Eddie Bravo, who just recently made the Python control illegal in combat jiu-jitsu, which is the Wagner Hocha hand over the mouth position.
Why is that illegal?
So he said he justified it by saying that because it's the dirtiest part of your body, you're not allowed to put it over someone's face, but you're slapping people in the face with your palms.
That makes no sense.
It makes no sense.
If you're really concerned about like close contact hygiene, you are in the wrong sport.
I think he thinks it's too cheap, to be honest.
I mean, I like
Wagner's going to use it on his guys.
I don't know. It just seems weird. Like you're allowing people to like twist your spine out of alignment, but you're not allowing them to like cover your mouth.
Yeah.
Odd line to draw.
Yeah, I know. And it's jiu-jitsu. I mean, it's pretty gross where sweat is going in each other's mouths and eyes.
Oh, I hate it when you're like grappling with someone and they're like in top position and then they like sweat and it like falls into your mouth.
Yeah. I mean, it's is it unclassy to put your hand over someone's face? Maybe, but it's also very effective.
Well, we've talked about this in the past too, right? Like being a common mistake that people make is they get dogmatic and they're too worried about what's classy and what's not classy. And at the end of the day, you need to do what works. Like if you are avoiding doing a technique because people frown on it, even though it's technically within the rules, you're actually really, really going to hurt yourself, right? Like at the end of the day, you need to understand, first of all, what is legal. And then second, are there any areas of the legal rules that you can exploit where people might not be ready for them? Like the whole leg lock game is a great example of that, right? That's an asymmetric warfare strategy where people realized that there was this whole area of the game that was being effectively disregarded because some genius had decided that like leg locks were a low class technique. So everyone just avoided them. And look at what happened now, right? Like the whole game has completely changed as soon as someone exploited that. It seems crazy to me that stuff like covering the mouth would be a problem. I don't know. That I do not see that as like a dirty or a low class technique at all. And it does work. I mean, even if you're not trying to suffocate the person, it is actually an effective way to control. I mean,
it's the worst. And like think about holding a tight mount position. I like to drive my chest right on top of the person's mouth, right across their face, because it's first of all, it's so close that they can't establish frames, but man, it's demoralizing and it's actually pretty hard to breathe at times and just exhausts you having someone's belly right in your face, especially if they're like hairy and don't have a shirt on underneath. It's pretty bad. So I think that is, it's just grappling and it's part of the rules. Just like I think that if you get neck cranked, it's also part of the rules. You know, I think that complaining when things like neck cranks are dirty or whatever is kind of just, it's kind of silly. But yeah. And, just speaking as a gym owner and as a competitor and as a coach, I think it's really important for people to, if you can, at least try refereeing if you're, if you are in the competitive jiu-jitsu scene in some way, shape, or form, or if you just want to educate yourself on the rules, you can check out, there's a YouTube page called IBJJF Tutorials, which is just short clips about, rules that they have, rule changes, and it's, I always learn stuff when I watch them. So even at the black belt level, I was amazed at how little I actually knew about the game of jiu-jitsu. And after studying those things and sort of and sharing them with my clubs, we actually started a competition class. And a lot of the time what we're doing is we're making scenarios, we're talking about strategies and rule sets. And I think it's really important that if you want to have a competitive jiu-jitsu team at your school, you need to have at least one day a week where the training is focused around the rules and the strategies, not just learning techniques and doing, sparring and doing drills and stuff.
Yeah. I mean, if nothing else, even if you have no interest in ever competing, it's still interesting to learn that because it teaches you to be aware of the situation around you. You realize that there's more at stake than just the technical jiu-jitsu that you're doing, but that there is a more contextual environment that you need to pay attention to. It's very important not to get tunnel vision when you're trying to solve a problem and forget what's happening in the world around you. So the other thing too that's always interesting is if you want to compete in a tournament, it's a great experience to have some white belt yell at you because he didn't like the way you scored his match. That's always super duper fun.
Yeah, I see that all the time. It's pretty funny.
I get a kick out of people who just like lose their mind because they like lost a local tournament white belt thing. Like they just take it so seriously, and you want to give them some context and be like, buddy, you're in a high school gymnasium. This is a white belt tournament. It's like, it's not even it's like citywide. It's a tiny tournament, but you're acting like this is life and death for you. Just, grow up.
Yeah. Or it's a parent. Where's the points?
That's the worst.
Where's the points for side control? Which is, if you know the rules at all, you know that there's no points for side control.
Yeah, I would actually like to see them change that. I think we've talked about this before. I think that rather than getting 3 for passing, you should get 3 for side control.
For just landing and side control.
Yeah, and I think that rather than I think that you should also get 2 points for reversing as well. I don't think it should just be sweeps.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I tend to agree with that one. Starting on the bottom and then finishing in a top position, like an Oompa sweep, or like reversing from side control, ending up in top side. I mean, but then do you get points for the sweep and you get points for side control?
From what situation? So you're on the bottom in like
we're lying in a T position. You're in a top pin, and
so like I have side control on you, and you like
and I flip you over, and I get up on top. Do I get sweep points and side control points? Like, to me, that doesn't make sense.
I don't know. I mean, from my perspective, all that matters is the result, right? I mean, if I'm able to get you into a position that dominant, I don't see any problem with having the points for it. You know,
because if you swept from an Oompa sweep and ended up in mount, you would get 2 for the sweep, and then you'd get your mount points as well.
Yeah,
you would. So under the staying consistent with that, you would get points for side.
Yeah, if you swept from the guard, you would get 6 points, right? If you assuming that you swept from the guard and into mount.
Yeah. So what would side control be worth then?
I think 3 points is fine.
3 points, same as a guard pass.
Yeah. I also think they should get rid of the knee on belly points and just consider that a form of side control, because mainly I find that to be super cheap. Like going from
it is cheap.
Going from side control to mount is a challenge. Going from side control to knee on belly is super easy. So this is like kind of a way to game the system. You just go to side control, briefly go to knee on belly that you don't even plan to use, and then just go back down. It's a cheap way to get 2 points. I don't see why it should be weighted as heavily as like a takedown or a sweep.
Yeah, I mean, debatable. I'm
not saying it's not an effective position. I'm just saying I don't think you need an additional 2 points on top of the 3 that you already got for passing.
Yeah, no, I get it. And people are going to agree and people are going to, disagree. And I think that, for example, I think like any form of back control should be points. Like I think a body triangle should be 4 points. I think that
I agree.
Crucifix should be awarded points because you have both of his arms isolated, and he's totally out of position there.
Yeah, so I think when it comes to back control, the obsession over having the hooks is kind of silly. Like as long as you're chest to back, I think that should be 4 points.
Yeah,
unless you're in like turtle or something.
Like as much as I kind of don't like the EBI rule set, I will say it can be pretty entertaining to watch, but it's also something that I don't really find very fun to compete under. I'd rather just do like points or even just a referee's decision or submission only, right? But going to the overtime rounds, I think that a crucifix would be a cool position to start in. Like if you can do arm bar position, why can't you start in a crucifix position?
Yeah, that's fair enough.
I think it'd be a pretty sweet position.
If you can start from an arm bar, why can't you start from a crucifix?
Yeah, and just like a lot of people who are no-gi grapplers, EBI rule set is kind of their main rule set that they train for. Like specifically a lot of 10th Planet guys, they get really good from the spider web, they get really good from the back control, and as a result they funnel their strategy to just get it to overtime. In a lot of the match, they're very hard to put away, a lot of these guys from these schools. So
another interesting example of how like the rules can completely change the art in a way that maybe wasn't intended. Just as soon as people realize that you can exploit the rules in a certain way, it can actually fundamentally change the underlying art itself.
Yeah, that's the funny part, is the whole argument for sub only was it's like, oh, this is the essence of jiu-jitsu, trying to go for the submission. That's what jiu-jitsu is really all about.
The essence of catch wrestling.
But then you actually put it into practice and you give it an overtime round, and what ends up happening is that guys will just dick around for the first 10 minutes and just, they won't overcommit too much and basically just get it to overtime, and then they just heavily rehearse the overtime positions, and that's sort of their whole strategy. So either way, it's very difficult to come up with a rule set that's not exploitable.
Yeah, every sport is going to have rules, and every rule set will be exploitable in some manner.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a nightmare to keep patching the rules without like having the game changing so often that people are just getting confused and frustrated and never able to really get good at it. But yeah, I mean, a big part of any kind of competitive endeavor is finding the weaknesses in the rules that you can exploit. And, in the case of like a submission only tournament, we've talked in the past about how really the essence of jiu-jitsu is position over submission. And the one thing about the IBJJF rules that I like is they reward position over submission, right? In fact, submissions are worth almost nothing at all unless unless you actually score one. And that is one situation where I think the rules themselves have led to making the martial art stronger by encouraging positional dominance. But yeah, if you have a martial art that ultimately is funneling you into submissions instead of into positions, then yeah, that's what you're going to get. You're going to wind up with people kind of like judo, where, you know, the whole goal is to basically stall and get out of trouble and then hit a kill shot, right? And in judo, it's an ippon, but in like an EBI tournament, it would be a submission. So they're kind of trying to stall out of the rest of the game and then get to the easy win.
Yeah, and I like the IBJJF rule set as well, because they will penalize passivity, whereas submission only doesn't. So you could actually have just as boring of a match in a submission only setting, and then it gets to overtime, and
then it's like two cats fighting.
Yeah. Well,
so out of curiosity,
that's basically the essence of jiu-jitsu, anyways. In a nutshell, is two cats fighting.
So out of curiosity, under EBI rules, when you go to like sudden death, what are the different positions that someone can start from, and how does that work? What is it, like a shootout in hockey where
basically,
okay,
yeah,
and what positions can you choose from?
Like it's the arm bar or the back control.
So you can actually choose to start directly from an arm bar. I'm assuming with like hands clasped or something.
Yeah, like the sit up arm bar position.
Oh, okay.
With hands.
But only those two positions.
Yeah,
I can't start from mount. I want mount.
And go until someone regards.
No one's going to regard on my mount. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, right.
I'm going to put my fat chest in their face, just like you suggested, and suffocate them.
But yeah, those are the two main positions, and then they do like riding time. So you know, if you get a submission, then the other person, it depends whose turn it is, but the other person might get an attempt to get a submission in a lesser amount of time than you did, right? And then if no one submits each other at the end of 3 rounds, they do the longest riding time.
Got it.
So either way, there's always ways to sort of game the system, and it's kind of impossible to make it like impartial, just because everyone comes from different backgrounds, everyone has different strengths and strategies.
And the sport is evolving too, right? Like even if someone were able to actually create a rule set that worked for everybody, someone's going to invent some new strategy that's going to turn the whole thing on its head, right? Like part of being a good competitor in any endeavor is finding a way to win within the rules. And that will probably mean creating a strategy that is unforeseen by your opponents, but still technically legal.
Yeah. What would be your ideal rule set? Because like I said, I think mine is IBJJF, and then you add the heel hooks and the moves.
For me,
and in the gi. I think it should be allowed in the gi too.
Yeah, for me, IBJJF my ideal rule set would be IBJJF. Reaping is legal. Heel hooks are legal. Let's say at like brown or purple belt, whatever. I think that a lot of the stuff that is legal at brown, like knee bars, should probably be legal at purple. That would be my thought.
I agree with that.
Yeah, in terms of the points, like we talked about, I think that reversals should be worth 2 points, just like sweeps. I think instead of getting points for passing, you should get points for having side control. So 3 for side control instead of 3 for passing.
For dominant positions.
Yeah. And I think that the knee on belly points are maybe a bit overkill.
What about jumping guard?
This is a tough one because like I don't know how I feel about like banning moves because they're too dangerous. You know, that was the logic behind reaping, and that's effectively the logic behind jumping guard. I mean, my thought would be if you don't want people to jump guard on you, just don't stand there. You know, you could there's nothing preventing you from also trying to pull a guard. I think that jumping guard is kind of a crap thing to do to the other guy. At the highest levels, sure, it's fine, but I think that if you want to have like an example of a technique that should be banned until like maybe purple, brown, or black belt, I think jumping guard could be one of those.
Yeah, I think heel hook should be allowed at black belt. And,
really?
And all the other moves should be allowed at purple belt.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't think heel hooks are so inherently dangerous that they need to be banned until black. I mean, I think heel hooks at
you're probably
brown
right.
Or even purple is fine. It's toe holds that freak me out more than anything.
If someone jumps guard on you, should you be able to slam them?
Yeah, we've talked about this before. I think that the ideal rule set has to take into account that slamming is a reality. I heard someone propose, I was talking to someone on like Reddit or Discord or something, and we were talking about this specifically, and their suggestion was maybe rather than like allowing slams, which, I mean, ultimately against a good opponent, unless you knock the guy out, a slam is going to hurt him, but it probably won't actually change the course of the match. So this guy's suggestion was maybe award some sort of points for like getting someone into slamming position. Like maybe say slams are illegal, but if you can herc someone up into a slamming position, okay, fine, you can have like some points for that. You know?
I think it can totally change the course of a match. Just look at Jeff Glover and Gio Martinez a few years ago at ADCC. Jeff had him in a triangle, and you're allowed to. I like this rule. You're allowed to slam out of submissions. So to me, that makes sense.
Yeah. If your submission is weak enough,
you have a choice to let it go.
Yeah. Like if you're, and also if your submission is so weak that your opponent has the proper alignment to basically power their way out of it, from my perspective, you have not really applied the submission effectively. This is a very, very common mistake with stuff like triangles, right? I mean, the thing about triangles is because slams are illegal, I don't think people realize how dangerous a triangle choke really is, because you are, we've talked about body tethering in the past. You have tethered your entire body to your opponent, and the rules grant you mercy on this. But in like MMA or in a real fight, if you're not actually doing that triangle properly, you're going to get slammed, and that is absolutely not a place that you want to be in.
Yeah, I guess really what it comes down to is, are you the kind of grappler who wants to compete under a non-point system, like a submission only system, or a point system like an ADCC or an IBJJF? As different as those two are, they're quite different, but they do both follow the positional style of jiu-jitsu. And throughout my career, I've gone back and forth about which ones I prefer. If I lose a points tournament, I'd be like, fucking hate these points tournament. I want to do a submission only tournament. I lose the submission only tournament. God, I wish it was a points tournament. I'd do so much better, right? So it's kind of one of those things. But I think ultimately points, there's a reason why there's points. There's a reason why positional dominance is so important in jiu-jitsu, and why putting an emphasis on regarding and alignment and things like that, and passing your opponent's guard, working towards isolating their head and shoulders. These are all positions that you can land more damage in theory in a real fight. So that's why they're awarded points.
I mean, I will say this, in a lot of situations, I'm not really a big fan of like the idea of a point system, because to your point, it can encourage you to like play towards the point system rather than trying to actually win.
Can't get rid of that though.
Yeah, but the thing is, I would say that in the case of IBJJF, I think the point system generally makes a lot of sense, and I think it makes the art stronger rather than weaker. Like there's things I don't like about IBJJF, but in general, the way that their point system is structured, it encourages a control-based approach, which I think is better than a kind of like gambling approach. Where you're kind of like diving for submissions. So I think it's succeeded in that front. So I would say that as long as it's done properly, I'd probably prefer a points-based approach.
Yeah, and I think it keeps the action moving a little bit more too. I think it's a little bit more exciting than... I mean, EBI is fun when you have two competitors who are game and are going for it, but if you have two competitors that really aren't going for anything, it can be just as boring as a boring points match as well. So it really depends on the two competitors, and it depends on the styles as well.
Yeah, there's no way to legislate excitement. You can't create a rule set that's going to guarantee things are going to be exciting all the time.
You can penalize though for passive.
You can definitely penalize, but I mean, you see this in MMA all the time. A lot of the time, a fight that's supposed to be really exciting just winds up not being. You can't guarantee something is going to be exciting. There's no point system that's going to make that happen every time.
Yeah, it's going to be styles, right? That makes it more exciting.
Yeah.
And like we're always talking about, there are always going to be people using the points. One thing to think about is when you're in the gym, you're always training and watching around you and making sure you're not bumping into people. And I made the mistake as a competitor for always trying to, let's say, do things the most ethical way, like be the most honest competitor I can be. And that's not always the best thing you want to do. Like sometimes if you're competing and you're going against someone there's a chance that they might take you down, or if you're in the middle of a takedown sequence and you happen to be in the center of the ring, you give them a better chance to score. But if you play around the outside a little bit, quite often you can use things like the border. If you're careful with how you do it, you can exploit the rules and avoid. But I would say that's not a rule exploit at all. That's playing within the rules completely, right? I mean, a rule, you're not cheating. No, you're not cheating.
You're just using the geography effectively.
That's right.
Yeah.
No, that's right. And that's the other way to look at it, right? Because you are kind of cheating the rules in a way, but you're right, you're not breaking any rules. So it's really, in my opinion, comes down to a higher fight IQ and a higher awareness of where you are on the mat, like you said, geographically. And these little tricks are everywhere throughout jiu-jitsu. And
everywhere throughout life, honestly.
And honestly, and everywhere throughout life. Like you mentioned tax returns and things like that earlier. So, really like empowering yourself with knowledge and trying to learn those rules. And if, like I said, if you're a gym owner or you have a competition team or you want to give some more life to your competition team and increase their chances of being successful, I think one of the best things you can do is have a comp class where you focus almost exclusively on scenarios that involve strategy and points, and you learn the points. And even if one person is at least one person is a referee, and you teach each other how to referee properly, that is one of the most effective things you can do for a competition team.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, one thing that I've learned and I've kind of adopted as a principle for living is, rather than trying my hardest to win, even if I'm trying in like the maybe not the most efficient or the most optimal scenario, it's a lot better to create scenarios or find scenarios where it's easy to win. Like a mistake a lot of people make is to like almost kill themselves trying to get what they want. But a far better approach is to cultivate an environment or a situation where getting what you want is a lot easier. Like in the case of life, a lot of this comes down to like tax strategy and stuff and just avoiding situations where that could be high risk to yourself. But in the case of jiu-jitsu, if you're competing, a lot of that is like knowing your real estate, right? If you are playing the borders of the mat, that's going to restrict your opponent's takedown options. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's definitely not illegal. You've read The 4-Hour Workweek, right? By Tim Ferriss.
Yeah.
So at the beginning of the book, and it's been a long time since I've read this, so I might butcher it, but he's got this story about how he won a martial arts championship. And it wasn't, now, despite the fact that he is a BJJ black belt, it wasn't jiu-jitsu. I think it was karate or something. But what he did was basically he played to the rules. He found some like weird rule exploit that nobody was paying attention to that basically said something like, if you push the other person out of the ring 3 times, you automatically win. It was some ridiculous thing. So all of these other people were trying to do karate with him, and he was basically doing sumo and just like pushing guys out of the ring. And everyone was getting pissed at him, but he won. Just because he was kind of playing a completely different game that was still within the boundary of the rules. And that's in my mind a great example of like finding the easiest way to victory by understanding the rule set that you're in. You don't have to be the most talented, you don't have to be the most athletic, but understanding and exploiting the rules is an advantage, just like having good cardio or having height or weight. It's a skill, just like grappling. So don't ignore it.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Yeah, for sure. And it like I said, you do have to maybe check out that IBJJF tutorials video, because this information isn't like easily.
It's incredibly hard to find accurate information.
Yeah, like you can find the information, like you can download the rule book on the IBJJF website, but it's, you're reading through like pages and pages. I think these videos really illustrate it quickly and they allow you to learn it quickly, but also applying it and recognizing it in a real situation is a skill on its own that takes it. Basically, like, I'll be honest, it took me a few tournaments reffing to finally get it. And during those tournaments, I had head referees shadow me and give me constructive criticism on the spot. So I was basically like mentored a little bit. And that is really valuable if you're learning anything. So
I know people love to crap on refs, especially in MMA. It's like, oh, these guys, how can you make that call? You don't know what you're doing. I mean, it is so hard to make like a split-second call like that with very minimal context, very minimal visibility. Being a ref is not easy, and especially because there are so many rules, and some of them are very esoteric and weird, and you've got to keep all of that stuff in your head at the same time. Like, it's not easy to be a ref, but it's a good experience to get that under your belt for sure.
Yeah, and to become a high-level competitor, it helps so much to have that experience. From a referee's point of view, you kind of take a step back from the fight and you're able to see the match from a bird's eye view, and you see it differently and you score it differently. And I realize now when I compete, like if I get a sizable lead, like it happened to me in the last tournament I was in, is I was going against a good guy, and I had a sizable lead because I managed to pass his guard and whatnot, and I knew he was going for the inside position. He was playing pretty much under the Danaher leg lock system, and I knew he'd be trying to get heel hooks. That was his, there's like a minute and a half left. I knew he wouldn't be able to catch up on the scoreboard easily. So I as long as I was able to avoid his attacks, I was willing to risk like taking a penalty here or there, because I know in the end it's not going to matter because I'm so ahead on the points. As long as I don't get so many penalties that I get DQ'd, which under a minute and a half is pretty much impossible. But like I stayed to the outside. I stayed just active enough in his guard and then would disengage so that he would get frustrated and not get any leg entanglements. And I actually at one point was in a reap and I managed to spin out of a heel hook, but it was close. So I kind of, I made a mistake there, and that kind of experience and ability to acknowledge what's going on is a really it takes years to develop. And nowadays, especially in IBJJF tournaments, I don't even really use leg locks to finish people anymore. I think one of the best applications of leg locks is to attack a leg lock so that you can come up with a sweep. Because it's hard to finish leg locks a lot of the time, but quite effectively, you can use it to make your opponent respect the leg lock, and then you can come up and get your points. And, on the same token, if you go for leg locks, a lot of the time what your partner will do is he will either get swept or he'll give you back exposure during his escape. So knowing that, you can always use the leg lock attempt in a positive way if you have that type of foresight. Whereas if you're just going into leg locks thinking about how you're going to finish the leg lock, it can be pretty disheartening when you don't finish the leg lock. You put a lot into it and then all of a sudden it fails and you're tired and you feel unconfident with your technique. So finding value in techniques that are kind of unexpected is really important as well. And again, just using something like that to get a better position is super valuable as a competitor.
Yeah, awesome. So in terms of the mental models that we talked about today, we talked about do what works. So this is especially important in the context of rule sets. Try to find the spots within the rule set that are still legal, but maybe underserved by your opponents. Those are often great situations where you can have a competitive advantage against someone who is otherwise more experienced and more athletic than you. We talked about asymmetric warfare, meaning trying to play to your strengths while playing to your opponent's weaknesses. It is usually not a good idea to attack your opponents where you are weak and they are strong. You want to do it the other way around. And we talked about body tethering in the context of Jiu-Jitsu. Sometimes people kind of forget how dangerous it can be to tie yourself to your opponent. But if you're playing under a skill set where slams are illegal, then that is something you need to be acutely aware of. So in terms of questions, we've got a short one, Matt, but the answer might be a bit long. So we were asked, I understand the concepts for the most part of alignment, but how does that fit, say, a rear naked choke? So this person is looking specifically to understand how alignment would be applied in a rear naked choke. Like how, I guess
the finishing mechanics?
Probably the whole thing. I mean, we can kind of talk about it from top to bottom. Maybe a good place to start with is the scorecard, right? We've talked in the past about how alignment really has three components: posture, structure, and base. And one way to understand the effectiveness of your position versus your opponent's is who has all three of those things and who doesn't. So, I mean, Matt, do you want to take this one away?
Yeah. So, just like we've talked about in the past, Rob Bernanke's system for talking about alignment, posture, structure, and base. This is basically just going to echo most of those concepts. And I recommend that now that the submission formula with Rob Bernanke with Stefan Kesting on Grapple Arts is out, definitely check that out. It would answer this question perfectly. But in terms of a rear naked choke, you basically... There's many variations of rear naked chokes, depending on, or strangles as the Danaher guys like to call it, depending on whether you're attacking your opponent's arteries or their windpipe, right? There's different mechanics depending on how you're going to do it. You could do a classic rear naked choke where the arteries are going to be blocked by your forearm and your bicep, or you could do a sideways rear naked choke like you're seeing a lot of these days, made almost famous. I guess you could say Nicky Ryan kind of made it famous, but it's like a rear naked choke that's off to the side where the triangle in your arms is sort of shifted to the side. But generally speaking, closing using your arms as wedges and frames that basically create a triangle around your opponent's neck, and then definitely breaking their posture by applying a wedge behind their head is probably one of the more important aspects of alignment breaking in a rear naked choke. Because you can for people out there that are looking to make their chokes a lot more powerful, always think, how can I break my opponent's posture and essentially push their chin into their chest is going to be one of the strongest ways you can you can make your chokes a lot stronger. You know, we tend to think it when we're new to jiu-jitsu, like getting that good squeeze and like that's kind of how I'm going to get my power. That's how I'm going to finish the majority of my chokes. But really, I find a lot of the majority of chokes and submissions in general anyways are a lot of it's based around how I can control my opponent's posture. So always pushing their head down, creating a wedge on the back of their head so they can't escape. These are kind of reoccurring patterns that happen in chokes.
That is a super important thing to bring up, which is that a lot of the time when people are going for a choke, they're focusing on just like squeezing, or they're focused just on the carotid arteries. But it's super important to understand that you want to like put pressure on the back of your opponent's head to kind of force their chin down to their chest. That's part of what makes it really, really powerful, especially if you're going for a blood choke. Another thing to bear in mind is that when you're talking about breaking posture, there's generally two ways to do it, right? Like posture means you can effectively position and utilize your spine and your core. If you want to break that, basically you can either collapse the person's head, but like we said, by pushing the head down, or you can turn their neck to the side. Both are valid approaches, but in the context of a choke, often it's very helpful to try to find a way to push your opponent's head down and like get their chin to touch their chest. If you can do that, then not only is that going to make it a lot harder for them to escape, but it's also going to put a lot more pressure on the arteries and make the choke much stronger.
Yeah, and I find one of the best ways that I like to finish the rear naked choke is to push the pressure down into your opponent's chest, almost like you're pulling your elbows down into their chest, and also trying to squeeze your elbows together, almost like you're creating a scissoring movement around their head, to make the space inside your arm smaller. But generally speaking, what I've been doing when I'm doing like rear strangles is I'm trying to actually choke at the base of the neck, because I find that's where the gag reflex happens. So if you get a choke around the base of the neck, I find that it's a lot more effective and you can put more pressure on their neck than if you try to choke, let's say, around their jaw.
Yeah. And this principle is true of basically any blood choke. Like if you're going for a darce or like a triangle, I mean, you always want to try to collapse your opponent's head down. That's always going to be a good thing to do if you're going for a blood choke. Cool.
But definitely check out the submission formula with Rob Bernacki.
I was going to ask you if there's anything you wanted to plug, but I think you've already got that covered.
Yeah. And what about the store?
Yeah. So we've talked about it before, but if you want to learn more about the mental models that we've talked about, and also if you want to get in contact with us, go to our site, BJJmentalmodels.com. If you want to buy our t-shirts or our gi patches, you can get them at BJJmentalmodels.com/store. And if you want to join our mailing list and get even more information from us, you can join at BJJmentalmodels.com/join. You can also follow us and chat with us on Facebook and on Instagram. We love hearing from you guys. We love hearing feedback. It's awesome that you guys are so active with us. We love hearing from you. And if you have any questions or you're encountering any difficulties in your training, please do reach out. We would love to help. So I think this was a good chat, Matt. Hope you guys did find this useful, and guess we'll talk to you next time.
All right, guys, take care, and happy taint hunting.
IBJJF sucks.